Judith.
I'm Michael Wayne.
Over the last year, during the pandemic, Michael and I hosted a series of webinars called Visioneering the Future that was showcasing ways toward a more positive society and world.
We looked at economics, democracy, leadership, universal basic income, work, healthcare and wellness, politics, the environment, and more.
This year, we are interviewing experts across the spectrum who are creating a positive way forward. We're calling it Voices for the Future.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is Voices for the Future. I'm Michael Wayne. I'm with...
And I'm Anadea Judith.
And today we're very honored to have our esteemed guest, David Korten, with us from Bainbridge Island, Washington, live with us. David hi, David.
Hi.
Yeah, David is accomplished in so many ways. And I'm going to read his bio, and then from there, I'm going to turn it over to David. David will give a presentation for 20 minutes or so, and then from there, we'll open up, Anadea and I will converse, and then we open it up to questions. Questioning is easy. You can put questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and I think there's even a way to request coming on screen. But anyway, David is the co-founder and board chair emeritus of Yes Magazine, president of the Living Economies Forum, and a full member of the Club of Rome. He serves as an advisor for the Institute for Ecological Civilization and the International Academy of Multicultural Cooperation, and as ambassador for the Raffi Foundation for Center for Child Honoring. Besides writing for Yes Magazine, a regular column, he's the author of numerous books. I hope perhaps you've read one or a few of them. And just a few of his books: Change the Story, Change the Future, A Living Economy for a Living Earth, Agenda for a New Economy, From Phantom Wealth to Real Wealth, The Great Turning from Empire to Earth and Community, and his international bestseller, When Corporations Rule the World. David holds MBA and PhD degrees from Stanford Business School, served as a professor at Harvard Business School, and lived and worked in international development in Africa, Asia, and Latin America for 30 years, serving on a mission to end global poverty by spreading the secrets of U.S. business success. I think David will no longer may believe in that mantra. And just some more explanation, David, before I turn it on. David now works to raise global consciousness on the social and environmental devastations wrought by the unrestrained abuse of power practiced by transnational corporations. And his focus is on building understanding and commitment to humanity's imperative to transition to an ecological civilization, one that's grounded in strong local communities and supported by institutions, technology, and infrastructure. He issues a bold call to replace Wall Street's phantom wealth machine with a new financial system devoted to the needs of the real wealth, Main Street economies. And he's currently framing a life-centric economics, I should say, to displace the money-centric ego-nomics that celebrates potentially terminal economics dysfunction. So welcome, David. So happy to have you with us. And I will turn it over to you.
Michael, thank you. It's such a pleasure to have this opportunity. Um, I understand that your audience is a very sophisticated audience, which is my favorite because of the importance of our coming together to put our ideas together in new ways that bring deep, ever deepening perspectives. Because this is truly a moment in which we have to make some very profound choices as the human species and move together in new ways. So you will probably notice that I, I, I doubt that anything I say today will be totally new because these are issues that you've all been working on for a long time. But I hope that the way I will bring them together may helpfully take us all to new insights from which then we can build together in the discussion. So, as I'm sure you're all aware, humanity's arrived at a moment of awakening to the depth of the transformation that we must now navigate if we are to have a viable future. And that transformation must be achieved within a seemingly impossible short period of time, impossible speed. Our current choices of how we live together are disrupting Earth's ability to maintain the stability of its climate, its supplies of fresh water, the fertility of its soils, the breathability of its air, and the species diversity on which it all depends. We're dealing with deep system failure. Marginal adjustments will not do. So our current situation requires a deep transformation in our understanding of the nature and purpose of life and what it means to be human. The emerging favored term for the future we must now create together is an ecological civilization, which some of you may have noticed is the theme of the current issue of Yes Magazine. Two statistics sum up our current crisis. According to estimates of the Global Footprint Network, it would take 1.7 Earths to sustain the current level of human consumption. Well, surprise, we have only one Earth. Yet even before COVID-19 shut down much of the economy, most of Earth's people faced a dehumanizing daily struggle to survive, while a tiny minority among us indulged in obscene displays of excess. Last year, in January 2020, the combined wealth of just 26 billionaires exceeded that of the poorest half of humanity, 3.9 billion people. And then as the excluded struggle to survive the increased pressures of the COVID-19 crisis, the world's richest billionaires were enjoying a bonanza so extreme that the business news now publishes daily financial results for the world's richest people. Just as one example, on November 12, 2020, it reported that the total net worth of Jeff Bezos, on that day, the world's richest person, stood at $183 billion. Now, poor Jeff, he was down $1.5 billion from the day before, but he was up $68 billion from the beginning of the year of COVID-19. Now, meanwhile, a global human population of 7.8 billion people continues to grow, thus putting ever further human pressure on what remains of the overstressed regenerative systems of the living earth on which our existence and well-being depend. As my good friend Swami Beyondananda says, Earth is dying. There goes GDP. The combination of currently unfolding events represents not just economic failure, it is an unprecedented global scale societal failure. Now, current economic theory assumes that human well-being is best secured by competing to maximize our personal financial returns so we can grow our personal consumption and thus grow the gross domestic product of our respective nations. This deeply flawed economic theory is known technically as neoliberal economics, but it is more accurately described as ego-nomics because it assumes a world of egocentric individuals seeking individual gratification through ever-growing, ever more ostentatious personal consumption. This version of economics is a flawed political ideology, not a science. Its claim to legitimacy rests in part on the deeply flawed and increasingly challenged theory of evolutionary biology that the most successful species are the most ruthless competitors. Ego-nomic theory has an additional fatal flaw. It embraces money as the defining measure of wealth and well-being, thus ignoring the obvious fact that money is just a number that banks create from nothing from a computer keystroke. We cannot eat, drink, or breathe money. It will not warm us on a cold night, nor stabilize the climate. It can buy only that which is for sale. Real value is created by the labor of Earth's living beings. That includes our human labor. As I will elaborate in a moment, life is labor. Yet because we accept money in exchange for things of real value, money gives those who possess it extraordinary power of those who do not. The more money an individual has, the more easily he or she can outbid others in the marketplace. This allows those whose labor is devoted solely to gaming the financial system to gain control of the real wealth created by those whose labor produces what is essential to our well-being. The benefits of productive labor thus accrue to financial gamers whose labor produces nothing of actual value. A viable human future depends on our successful transition to the institutions of an ecological civilization structured to empower and reward those who provide the productive labor essential to the well-being of people and Earth. This requires the guidance of a new economics, an economics, eco as an ecology, grounded in an understanding of another fundamental truth. Life exists only in diverse communities of living beings that self-organize to create and maintain the conditions essential to their individual and collective well-being. I am because of the bees that pollinate, the trees that produce oxygen, the beetles that replenish the soil by aiding the decomposition of dead plants, the microbes that digest the food in my gut and recycle my waste, and the people who love and care for me as I love and care for them. Without these many diverse beings, each making their contribution to the well-being of the whole, Earth would be just another dead rock floating in space, and I would not be experiencing the miracle of life. Now, if any aspect of this internal and external interdependence suffers serious disruption, I risk death. It is the same for every living being, including the living Earth. Now, for some 200,000 years, humans lived in communities in direct relationship with one another and other beings of the living Earth community. There emerged from the African experience, the birthplace of humanity, a distinctive insight into life's inherent interdependence. That insight is now confirmed by the leading edge of the physical, biological, and social sciences. Africans call it Ubuntu, commonly translated as I am because you are. Ubuntu, I am because you are. In its fullest meaning, Ubuntu acknowledges that all living beings are related and interdependent. From this wisdom follows an insight foundational to economics. One might call it the Ubuntu Principle. My well-being depends on your well-being. I do best when we all do well. The frontiers of science now give us an ever-deepening understanding of the interdependence of life. Quantum physics tells us that relationships, not particles, are the foundation of what we experience as material reality. Biology is finding that intelligent life exists only in diverse communities of choice-making organisms that together, through their labor, create and maintain the conditions essential to their individual and collective existence. The social scientists find that humans get their greatest satisfaction from caring for other living beings. Be clear that this is not about suppression of the individual. The well-being of the community depends on a population of highly diverse individuals who are in turn aware of their dependence on the community. Powerful implications follow from the Ubuntu principle for how we address the purpose of the economy, the allocation of power in society, and the procreation of the human species. Call them the 3 Ps: purpose, power, and procreation. So take them one at a time. First, the purpose of an economy. Indeed, the purpose of a healthy society is the well-being of living people and the living earth. More specifically, it is to provide all people with material sufficiency and spiritual abundance while supporting the well-being, beauty, and creative unfolding of Earth's community of life. In simple terms, it means more fun, less stuff. We best measure the performance of the economy using 2 panels of indicators as proposed by Kate Raworth, the author of Donut Economics. The first panel of indicators tracks the well-being of the living Earth, and specifically the health of the regenerative systems by which Earth maintains climate stability and ample supplies of clean, fresh air and water, fertile soils, and beautiful landscapes. The second panel measures the well-being of people, all people. Is everyone getting a nutritious diet, clean air and water, a secure and comfortable place to live, and satisfying relationships and a sense of purpose? Are our families and communities strong and thriving? Are our children healthy, happy, and learning? Now, if these measures are strong, we should have no reason in the slightest to care whether the misleading number we call GDP is going up or down. Next comes power. For the economy to achieve its intended purpose, power must reside in people committed to the well-being of Earth and all its living beings. The people of each place must have sufficient control of their own resources to adapt to the distinctive and often dramatically different local circumstances presented by meadow, mountain, jungle, desert, Arctic, and other landscapes. To deal with its distinctive needs and opportunities, each community must learn to care for and live within the limits of the regenerative potential of their community's territory. So long as each local community meets its needs through its own labor in self-reliant balance with its local ecosystems, Earth's community of life remains in balance with itself and Earth. In an ecological civilization, serving each local community against protecting and securing each local community against predatory colonization from outside its borders is a major responsibility of the institutions of national and global government. Within this frame, all institutions, including the institutions of business, must be accountable to the community they serve. Take note that the limited liability for-profit corporation holds a legal license to acquire unlimited economic power, accountable only to faceless, placeless owners who trade their shares in placeless financial markets, seeking instant profit with no regard for social and environmental consequences. Such corporations are mortal enemies, not only of democracy, but also of markets and of life. They are illegitimate institutions that have no place in the ecological civilization to which we must now transition. More appropriate to our needs are local family businesses and worker community-owned cooperatives whose owners have strong community roots in and a deep personal interest in their community's well-being. Now, equally obsolete is the current system of monopolistic private for-profit banks that create money by issuing interest-bearing debt that can be repaid only so long as GDP growth is generating sufficient new debt to pay the interest on outstanding debt. We must organize around what makes communities most healthy rather than around what makes corporations most profitable. Now we come to the third P, procreation. This is our need to manage the continuing regeneration of the human species to maintain our balance with one another and Earth, while fulfilling the potentials and responsibilities of our humanity. Life replenishes and renews itself through continuing cycles of conception, birth, maturation, adulthood, death, and rebirth. These cycles are essential to life's resilience, regeneration, and continuing evolution toward ever greater diversity, beauty, awareness, and creative potential. As we advance in our ability to improve human health and delay our own death, we must simultaneously learn to manage our human reproduction, to limit our total numbers, and distribute ourselves to maintain balance with Earth's regenerative systems in every place where we humans live. The key to limiting our numbers resides in recognition that women control their fertility if provided with education, attractive career opportunities, and the means of fertility control. The more daunting challenge is the necessary redistribution of the human population as ever more of Earth's places are rendered socially and environmentally unlivable by reckless human choices. Now, most people prefer to remain in the place they know as home for so long as that is a viable option. We will all benefit from cooperative efforts to restore the livability of each of Earth's places wherever possible. Our common human future depends on a dramatic transformation in our understanding of ourselves and our relationships with one another and Earth. It begins with taking seriously the care and education of our children and the truth that it takes a village to raise a child. The human family has more than enough abused and neglected children. What we lack is adequate attention to the care and development of all our children. Imagine a world in which every child is a wanted child and all children are loved and supported by a caring community of people committed to actualizing the fullness of their humanity. We never outgrow our need for learning, nor our need for a village. Our need from birth is to learn how to learn together and to do so throughout our lives, a task which conventional textbook education wholly fails. Now, the disruptions of COVID-19 have exposed with uncommon clarity the dramatic failures of a society seduced by an ideology of self-centered competition. We can now see more clearly the imperative to transition to an ecological civilization that recognizes the interdependence of life and the responsibilities that go with our distinctive human ability to choose our common future. This awakening makes the COVID-19 shutdown an unprecedented opportunity to engage the transition to the culture, institutions, technology, and infrastructure of the ecological civilization on which a healthy Earth community and viable human future depend. Recognition of the consequences of our global embrace of the deeply flawed ideology of ego-nomics is not new. Contributors to ecological and heterodox schools of economics have been advocating alternatives for decades. These efforts commonly challenge GDP as the defining measure of economic performance, acknowledge planetary boundaries, and argue for action to reduce economic inequality. We need to build on their insights as we develop an economics dedicated to actualizing the potentials of our humanity. The time has come to clearly and unambiguously acknowledge the essential wisdom of our ancestors who recognized, as the leading edge of science now affirms, that our individual well-being is inseparable from the well-being of our neighbors and a living earth. We must also acknowledge that money, which has no existence outside the human mind, can be a useful economic tool that becomes a deadly threat when pursued as an ego-nomic purpose. There is much work ahead as we find our way to the materially sufficient and spiritually abundant future for all in a thriving ecological civilization. So back to you two.
Oh, well, we'll all, I'm sure everyone watching also will applaud. Thank you, David. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, so I'll start. You're talking at the end about the economic, and you brought up the Ubuntu, and I am because you are, and it made me think when the United States was founding itself as a country, a government, and democracy, which was still new. A lot of the ideas for democracy came from the Iroquois nation.
Yes.
And there was indigenous wisdom, the traditional wisdom, and it helped form, in the writing of the Constitution. And even Benjamin Franklin brought some of the Iroquois to the constitutional conventions to help. And yet those ideas of the Iroquois, of looking out for each other, seventh generation and all that, where we could have been a whole totally different country, this American democratic experiment project. So where would you say we went wrong?
We just had a lot to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned Ben Franklin. He was a slave owner.
Mm-hmm.
As were many of the founders, including George Washington. And if you think about it, they were born into that. They grew up in it. They didn't know how to live without slaves.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how deep their thinking went into recognizing that it was a really bad idea.
We don't know how to live without cars.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
that's polluting the atmosphere and increasing global warming. So, and we don't know how to do without them.
And yet our future absolutely depends on doing without them.
Right.
And in fact, if we begin to design our living spaces in ways that minimize our dependence on cars, we will actually have much better ways of living. I learned this while living in New York City. It's one of the few places in the world where you've got to be out of your damn mind to have a car.
Yeah.
And you don't need one. I mean, there's absolutely no need for one unless you have reasons to be going outside the city on a very regular basis. Now, there's lots of things to improve in New York City, but in so many ways, it represents more of what we need. And then you take places like Houston or LA, you need a car for every member of the family, every adult member of the family. And there's no way you can live without it. So it's not it's a matter of individual choice to some extent where you live. But once you're in that place, we are so limited in the choices that are available to us, which means we've got to have a whole new mental framework, and we've got to learn together how to live together in a very different way. And we've got to learn to do that very, very fast, which we now have the capability to do. I mean, this is one of the extraordinary things that for people of our generation, I assume both of you grew up in a world in which we had no internet, which very few people in the world spoke English other than people who lived in the United States and the UK. And actually, when I was a child, at least, when I was very young, it was before we routinely got on airplanes to travel places. So, like a year and a half ago, my wife and I, we took a flight to Cape Town, South Africa, which is the farthest place in the world that you can get from Seattle, Washington. And now with COVID, we get on the internet, and just like we're doing right now, we have instant communication with potentially virtually anyone in the world. The change has happened so fast, and it is so fundamental in terms of defining who we are and what our possibilities are. We're now in a position to learn. I mean, it's absolutely disgraceful that we're still trying to figure out how to live without slavery and racism. But many of us have figured out how to deal with it individually, at least. That we recognize the unity of humanity, and that there is a tremendous benefit to diversity to the overall system. But that's a diversity that feeds into our creativity. And the whole idea of elitism and class and this just, it's basically unforgivable at this point. We haven't gotten beyond that, but we certainly have the potential to do it, and we're very much on our way. And I think things like the current political trial that's going on. It's tremendous educational experience. Mm-hmm. You listen to that testimony. How could we possibly tolerate a police system that operates like this? How could we possibly tolerate that?
And it's fairly recent that we've had body cams so that we can actually observe these things, and they're there for all to see. We've all been witness to this. We all were witness to the Capitol insurrection. We're all witness to George Floyd's murder. We're all witness to what's going on. Do you see that is going to help us change more rapidly? Because you talk, rightfully so, about how rapidly we need to make the changes to our impending disasters while we're entrenched in old systems.
Well, the other part of it is our learning. And this is something we need to figure out its implications for education. And we still organize education largely around textbook learning and trying to memorize what's in textbooks. But, we become so accustomed to our ability to search the internet and instantly get any information, anything that we have learned as a species since, at least it's been recorded. We don't have to go to a library. All I got to do is pick up my phone and ask the question, and the answer,
Hey Siri.
yeah. So the potential to learn in new ways with extraordinary speed is breathtaking. And it all supports the increasing speed with which we are capable as a species of changing and learning. But this is also partly understanding that, we're the only species that can do this. We're part of a living earth. We're dependent on all these species, but in the end, we are inevitably the dominant species. But, again, as humans, we spent so much time focusing on what are our human rights, but we don't have any list of what are our human responsibilities that go with those rights. And the very simple truth that there are no rights without responsibilities.
That's right.
So I want to ask you, you've talked a lot about today and your writings about GDP. So I want to ask you a question of it. And we also had Dwayne, who had written in and asking to discuss the unsustainability of the economics based on continuous growth. But regarding GDP, as is known by those who study it, it was a device that got developed in the 1930s by the American economist Simon Kuznets, who later on who kind of decried the use of GDP. But I want to read a quote. In 1968, when Bobby Kennedy was running for president, he said this about GDP. He said, "It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile." And so that was 1968, some over 50 years ago. And yet we still can't get away from GDP. So why do you think that is so? What is it that makes it such a god?
Yeah, I mean, many of us have wondered about that a long time, including the fact, I mean, I was very much influenced by the Club of Rome the Limits to Growth study, which was in 1972, just shortly after that statement by Robert Kennedy. And yet, actually, just very recently in conversations with Tom Hartman, I realized the reason is very clear. The 1960s were a time of deep turmoil. There was all kinds of cultural revolution and the hippie movement and the LSD and the civil rights and racism and all those issues were coming up. It was a huge threat to establishment interests, who then mobilized around what became known as the Powell Memo, which came out in 1971 by a corporate lawyer who later became a member of the Supreme Court. And essentially, these were the people whose interests were challenged by those uprisings. And they came to realize that their power and their privilege depended on changing the story. And they had the money to buy educational institutions, to buy media, to buy lawyers, to fill our courts with right-wing conservatives. And they did. And we had no comparable organizations or comparable funding communicating that alternative message, which was already beginning to come forward at that time. Now, since then, we're now in a stage where we're beginning to break through that the flaws in the system are so foundational they're impossible to ignore. And it feels to me like we are in a time of extraordinary breakthrough. I even find in my own circles, which involve mainly international conversations, particularly Zoom conversations, um, asking these deeper questions and engaging much deeper conversations than we've ever had before. If you've been involved in these international conversations, you know they have typically been carried out in physical meetings, which means every time you have one of these conversations, you're getting on an airplane and flying to some other part of the world. And, it's costing you thousands of dollars and days of time. And so you go someplace and you go with a prepared speech, and you're so focused on your speech, you're not even paying attention to what everybody else is saying. And we just talk at each other. And now we can begin to talk with each other.
Yeah, Charles Eisenstein said in one of his books that we could better entertain the end of humanity than the end of capitalism.
Yeah.
Michael mentioned we have a question from one of our listeners here. Please discuss the unsustainability of an economics based on continuous growth, and refer to Al Bartlett's famous lecture. So maybe you can comment on this economic model of growing, based on the warehouse of a finite planet, that we are going to bankrupt nature, and there's no bailout that's going to help us with that one.
No, there's no bailout. Well, I don't know what to say beyond what I'm sure everybody in this call knows. The idea that you can grow consumption perpetually on a finite Earth is an oxymoron. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing in a way to me about the limits to growth study of Club of Rome. This fancy computer model and so forth. So the most sophisticated of technology at that particular point in time to make a point that should be obvious to anybody with a brain, that you can frame in one sentence. Perpetual growth on a finite Earth is an oxymoron.
But how do you change that paradigm and that thinking in the powers that be?
Well, here's another part of what's happened. I mean, at the time Robert Kennedy was making his observation and the Club of Rome was publishing their study and so forth, we were still in our science, including our biological science. We really were focused on a physical reality. We were not in a living system frame.
That's right.
And while, again, we sort of know that, we're each conscious and we're supposedly continuously making intelligent decisions, there was nothing in science that recognized that particular ability. So we were dealing only with physical realities. And if you're just dealing with a kind of a physical world lens through which you see all around you, then you interpret it all in mechanistic ways. To understand life, you need to be able to look at it through a living system lens, and that recognize that life exists only in communities of diverse organisms. I mean, where I was first introduced to this is, again, such an obvious example. This was in about 1960, no, 1979, 1989, I'm sorry. Terrible in keeping all these. No, 1998. I was at a conference in Spain, and this little woman of obvious Chinese descent walked up to me and introduced herself. She says, "I'm Dr. Maywan Ho, and I know you're writing, and I'm a microbiologist. So I'm a new biologist, and I think my work is relevant to what you do." And that was at a time, shortly after writing When Corporations Rule the World. And I was thinking in my own mind that just laying out what we're against is a losing strategy.
Right.
You have to have a positive alternative. Yeah. So what does that positive alternative look like?
Mm-hmm.
And it struck me that somehow it had to relate to life and how life organizes. But the only biology I knew was the conventional Darwinian biology of the domination, the competition, the domination of the strongest and most fit. And what she pointed out, among other things, was the simple fact that each of our bodies is comprised of tens of trillions of living cells. And we exist because of their constant engagement in the exchange of nutrients, water, energy, and information. Tens of trillions of individual decision-making cells, and that includes not only this, the cells that are integral to our body, but the microorganisms that digest our food and perform all sorts of other essential functions. And if they're not functioning together, we don't live. Now you begin to get your mind around that. It is breathtaking in its implications. How did that happen? I mean, my field at business school was organization. How do you how do you get corporations organizing together, get any group of people in an organization working together? We're talking about a few supposedly very intelligent human beings trying to make something work together. A really simple challenge compared to just what happens in each of our bodies. And we have very little idea how it actually works. How do they do that? We're just beginning to recognize that it's a reality. So then you begin to take that analogy and you apply it to Earth as a living organism, and recognize that out of all of the galaxies that we now understand exist in the great expanse of the cosmos, there are just trillions of trillions of planets. And we haven't examined them all, we never will, but we still haven't found any that we have reason to believe has surface conditions similar to those on Earth. And the reason is obvious. These conditions on Earth were created by the evolving living beings as they emerged up from matter.
Exactly.
And became matter with conscious matter with a capacity to choose. Wow.
Mhm.
Okay, so you get that in your mind. That becomes the image at which we begin to observe the reality that we're part of. And then we can begin to ask very different questions and come up with very different answers. And I think, I think we're in the midst of that process. It is happening within science, but I think we're also seeing an awakening beyond science of ordinary people who, in a way, have always recognized this, but you become reluctant to talk about it when it's not part of the zeitgeist, the common imaging, the common understanding of our fellow humans.
Yeah, so talking about our possibilities, you use the phrase "a great turning that can create an ecological civilization." So I'm wondering, David, if you could explain more for everyone what you mean by that phrase, "the great turning."
Yeah, I mean, some call it the Great Transition. That was the term that worked for me back when I was writing that book. Um, the simple part of this is just recognizing that, we have we call ourselves civilized. But what we call civilization has characteristically been a system of domination, of centralization of power, and a system of exploitation. Now, by any rational definition of what do we mean by civil, that is not civil. What we have called civilization is not civil. It's not civilized. um, so part of our understanding is getting clear that the things we need to go if we're to have a viable future are not minor adjustments in a system that's basically working. It is we are going in absolutely the wrong direction. And in a sense, virtually everything has to change in terms of our choices of technology, our institutions and how we structure them, recognizing, yes, we've been talking for a long time in the United States about democracy. But if you go back and look at what we called democracy in the beginning, it wasn't even any kind of approximation. I mean, the vote originally went only to white male property owners, probably half of whom a major part of their property was slaves. Now, that's not a democracy, and it's taken us a very long time to get beyond that. And as we're seeing so clearly right now, we're still working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And we got major barriers. So, when you've got a Supreme Court that's mainly hung up on what did the founders intend?
Yeah.
Well, I guess they intended slavery.
Yeah.
They intended voting by white males. And what the hell are you women doing voting? I mean, we've got so far to go. And then, of course, in terms of our the more recent shift has been with our business institutions. And, what we have now in terms of the domination of corporations and global financial institutions goes far beyond what I wrote about when corporations ruled the world in 1995. I mean, it's worse by orders of magnitude. And the damage is worse by orders of magnitude. But at the same time, we're now getting this awakening of consciousness that is probably beyond the right-wing ability to manipulate. People are waking up. But it all comes down to recognizing, wow, fundamental changes in our political institutions, in our educational institutions, in our media institutions, and our business institutions. And those changes can be supported and facilitated centrally, but they actually have to be built up from the bottom, which is the way life organizes, because life absolutely depends on micro adjustments at the micro level, just like is happening within our bodies. But particularly in the human situation, it has to also be supported by how we see the world in our minds and the ways we organize our institutions and choose our technologies and all these things that ultimately limit the choices we can make as individuals and make it harder to make alternative choices as communities. But we'll ultimately have to make the community choices with an awareness of our dependence on the community and how the community needs to be supporting the individual.
David, talking about what could be, can be, and bring it to our current political situation. Do you see hope in the current Biden administration and the American Rescue Act and the infrastructure bill he has now proposed? I mean, one, it could be either a temporary pause or permanent death knell for neoliberalism. It's the first time since at least the 1960s public policy is aiming towards helping the bottom up, perhaps the middle class, the working class. So do you see that that can be a positive?
I see it very much positive. I mean, Biden is not as, I don't know, say radical as I would like.
Yeah.
But as it's worked out, I think he's the very best choice that we had available at this time because he has so much experience. And he really has a depth of understanding that's quite extraordinary for somebody with that level of experience and that level of connection with the establishment. Now, in the infrastructure bill, I would prefer that we got really clear that the goal is not to shift to electric cars. It is to get rid of our dependence on cars, and that depends very deeply on how we think about rebuilding our infrastructure, so that we organize our local communities around the centers, around the major businesses that we need to relate to. I mean, like where I live here on Bainbridge, I can, I walk a block and a half to, a wonderful locally owned supermarket. I walk to my drugstore, which is also a locally owned drugstore. I also walk to parks and to the waterfront and all of that. This is a very micro scale, but what we need to be doing every place. We need to organize so that the vast majority of people can get to most of the places they need to go by foot or by bicycle. And if they need to go further than that, there should be public transit. And if you have a car, it should be an electric car. And, that would be for people who on a regular basis have to travel further distances where public transit is not available. Now, the other piece of this is being aware of this frame of emergency versus emergence. Mm-hmm. We have to make change very quickly. It is an emergency. We don't have time to change our institutions, to redo our infrastructure. So we have to take immediate actions within the structures that we have in place. But we need to do that with a recognition of the larger, deeper changes that we need to move toward in the longer term, so that what we do now as part of the emergency aligns with what we need to do to facilitate the new. Mm-hmm. And I think going back to Biden, he's probably going about as far as anybody could expect to go within the limitations he's dealing with.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the whole political system. And that's interesting. You talk about emergency in 2008 with the financial crash. It was deemed an emergency, and the federal government, the Federal Reserve, and especially the Federal Reserve, pumped tens of trillions of dollars to the banks, to Wall Street banks. So here we are, things like climate change, the need for a Green New Deal, the need for getting away from cars you talk about. Why don't we see that as an emergency? I mean, to emergence, but that same amount of money should be pumped into social and public investment.
Well, it's why we need to get these new visions in place of where we want to go. The 2008 crash would have been, in a way, it would have been an ideal time mm-hmm. to break up the banks and financial institutions and to break up the big corporations. And it probably would have required at that time the government come up, if the government's coming up with the money, use it to buy them out, then break them up and turn them into worker ownership or community ownership of some kind. Not traditional socialism where it's all owned by a central government and some sort of central dictator, but is really rooted in the community in terms of community power and community control. I mean, this is a thing that's so amazing. Again, it's so obvious. If you're a business owner, that your business is in the community where you live, and it is meeting needs of your neighbors. Wow. You're really stupid if your whole goal is simply to maximize your profit. I grew up, my dad, my family was a retail merchant family. We had a music and appliance store, which was assumed I was going to head when I grew up. But we were providing my dad. It was so clear he loved to make money, but his primary focus was on serving his customers because they're his neighbors, and if they're doing well, he's doing well. So it's all integrated in together. But you get all the ownership out there somewhere in outer space, and people trading derivatives and split second Wall Street trades and so forth. That whole set of connections is totally obliterated, and it becomes totally exploitative. It's a huge difference between a real market economy, which means a community market, which is what Adam Smith had in mind if you actually read his books rather than the ideology. So anyhow, in some ways, the basic issues are so simple, but you get into the details, man, it gets impossibly complex very fast, which again is why we need to be making a lot of the decisions very locally.
Yeah.
Well, I think the question so often is how. Many of us know these are the changes we need to make. We need to make people aware of our dependence on nature and our interdependence with nature. We need to make people aware of the economic system and its failure, and our political system, the dueling two parties that just is totally wasteful of energy and time and resources. But how do we transform that? And I love what you're saying, and this is why we're doing Voices for the Future, that we need to create a future vision of where we're going. Then we don't dwell so much on the past, and we say, this is a better mousetrap. This is a better way to do it. And that some of these things are not just sacrifices, they're actually better.
Yes.
It's more fun to be able to walk down and get your latte down to the corner store.
It is.
And, there's advantages to this. So how do you paint this positive future for us?
Well, I think, what you say is absolutely foundational. And this question of stepping back, that this whole thing that we're better off as we consume more, that's all propaganda.
Yeah, literally.
If you think about it, I mean, we'd all like to be reasonably secure, but buying a new computer is kind of a thrill for maybe the first few hours, and then you're just in the agony of trying to make the damn thing work.
Yep.
But if you really begin to get an image of where we need to go and where we can go, there's virtually no sacrifice.
Exactly.
I mean, how big a sacrifice will it be to give up war?
Yeah.
Amen.
Oh, probably not much. And think of what that would relieve in terms of misused resources. And of course, the conduct of war is the destruction of so much. And, as we've discussed, it's a little more complicated giving up the car. But if you begin to think about living in a neighborhood where you don't need a car, and where you're really interacting regularly with your neighbors and so forth, and yet you have a secure internet connection so you can also instantly communicate with anybody else in the world. Wow, why do you want a car? But you go through almost every aspect of this and you realize, wow, that would be a better way to live. That's not a sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we'll open up to questions. We had some questions come in through the chat box, and if anyone else wants to enter anything in the chat box or the Q&A box, feel free. I can read the first question from Grace. Let's see. Grace writes, what about universal mandatory fair trade and universal mandatory profit sharing laws effectively breaking up megalopolis, as my father did for Germany's coal and steel cartels that he told me were a big part of the dysfunctionality that made Hitler's rise to power possible? Education that teaches values and emotional healing is first priority, and regulations that support all of what is ethical and sustainable for all people. Some want a totalitarian Mao type solution, but we can support women in cooperation and create wisdom councils so we bring the best in diversity in every way, and good communication is evolutionary. So Grace asking universal mandatory fair trade, universal mandatory profit sharing, and so on. So if you follow that, David,
Yeah, yes.
yeah.
The Well, here let's start with the trade issue first. Part of our need, I mean, the whole idea of, for a long time, I mean, you still see this, people saying, well, Africans need to be able to, export their food to the United States so they can make foreign exchange. Basically, that's to get foreign exchange to pay off all the debts that the World Bank and the IMF have unloaded on them, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you step back and you say, yeah, export their food. Wow, that's, what a good idea. What do Africans most need? Oh my, I think it's food. So why are they better off exporting it? And why are we better off eating food from Africa rather than eating the food produced by our local farmer? Well, who benefits from that? Oh, it's the transnational agribusiness corporations. Oh, that's why we want to eat food from Africa instead of from our local farmer. But if we're going to move to healthy, self-reliant bioregional economies, we want to minimize that.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that these ego-nomic economists miss is the early trade theories, particularly from David Ricardo. Yeah, Ricardo was for trade, but he was only for trading things that you couldn't reasonably produce locally. So the basic idea is you meet most of your needs locally with a minimum of, big cargo container ships running around getting stuck in the Suez Canal. To what you can buy by walking down to your corner supermarket or your farmer's market. And then, okay, we can't grow coffee locally, so maybe we can buy some coffee from Africa or Latin America. That works out fine. And we maybe, maybe our apples, they like our apples, but they don't grow so well in the tropics. So we trade them some apples for some coffee, and we all have a little better, more fun diet. But it's a whole different thing than somehow, oh, we're all better off if everything that we buy we import from the far side of the earth and we sell them our stuff so we can buy it. And wait a minute, what's the logic of that?
I've read that the average item in a grocery store travels 1,500 miles. That's the average.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. It's absurd, absolutely absurd. And all that transportation is burning up, biofuels.
Mhm.
Now, on the profit, you do want profits connected to the people who are making the decisions in the business. Um, you know, we've kind of got sucked into this idea that in an ideal world, none of us should have to work. We just consume. Um, life exists only with labor.
Mhm.
And again, if we look at what it is that makes us most healthy and happy, it's being engaged with our community. It's doing things that are beneficial to the community. It is serving life. I mean, my wife's greatest satisfaction is, we live next to a local church that has a community garden. It's got extra property, and so she's got several little 4x4 pea patches where she grows flowers, and we live in a condo, so we don't have a backyard, and she grows vegetables and flowers and so forth. And we can buy everything in our supermarket, but she just loves that. um, that's part of what makes life worth living. It's joyful, as well as her other work working with the community on how do we reduce our dependence on cars and all of that. It's all totally voluntary, just because, and same thing I do. I mean, I work more globally on these conceptual issues, but I get no income whatever for it. It's what I live for. I mean, why else? What else would I want to do with my time? Um, it's where I get my joy, is meeting with people like you and all the people who are participating in this discussion. Um,
That's why we're doing this series, because it's our joy and it's our contribution. But this brings
I
me
expect
to
it's not
a
going to make you a
question.
billionaire.
Yeah, this brings me to a question of something Michael and I did a seminar on before about universal basic income that
Yeah.
frees people up from this being compelled to make a living, to make a profit, to sell something, so that they can work in a community garden, or they can volunteer at a senior center, or what's your opinion of universal basic income?
Yeah, it's a really complex question, and it's very appropriate to this conversation. Um, I think it fits into the emergency versus emergence frame.
Mhm.
I think it's not the goal to have an economy in which we don't have to do any labor because we get we get paid. And a lot of the labor, I mean, somebody's got to do it. So if we're hiring somebody else to take care of our children and we make our money to pay them by caring for somebody else's children, what's the logic of that? um, on the other hand, in terms of freeing us up from the repression of the existing system, some kind of guaranteed income may be the loosening up that allows us to move ahead, as long as we recognize that it's not the goal to meet all of our needs with a universal income. It's a kind of a bridging device that ultimately where we want to go. Well, this gets back to GDP. And this is one of the contradictions. I mean, there are groups that argue for managing the economy to reduce GDP. Now, if we just reduce GDP, um, the results are likely to be disastrous for, could go on for another 20 minutes explaining that. On the other hand, if we do the things that need to be done, like getting rid of war and reducing our dependence on cars and shopping locally and so forth, GDP will go down.
Yeah.
But that's different. But rather than managing against GDP, we want to be managing against the results that we really want. And the trickiest part of that, of course, is the transformation of the financial system, so that our financial system is built around, the creating national currencies is a public process that is totally transparent and accountable, and it's done by the community, which means it's probably going to be done by government. And our banking system is a system of local banks that are owned by the community. Probably the preferable form is local cooperative banks, in which we put our money, and then if we need a little loan to buy a house or start a business, we go to our local bank and we draw on the collected savings of our community. And so then, interest, instead of flowing from, the people on the bottom to the people on the top, so that the people at the top keep getting richer, it's recycling. I've got savings and I've got a loan, and it's that kind of process. So, that person is asking very good questions. The answers are a little more complex than just a simple yes/no answer.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a question from George. I'll just take snippets of it. And he says, and this is something you, David, you talk about, that how we have to change our thinking. And George says, we'll never think our way out of our present mess, speaking of existing institutions. Then he talks about the Essenes and how they provided for each other, self-sufficient. They didn't think they had money. Maybe they gifted freely seeds, plants, healing services.
Wait, who are these?
The Essenes, they were, from the biblical times. But what he was saying is, at the end, George suggests or wonders we could return to a voluntary gifting economy, as I see some young people doing today. And I know, like, Charles Eisenstein wrote the book Sacred Economics, and there's been talk gift economy. Do you think that has a place then, David, in creating something new, or our economics?
Yeah, I think the key again is recognizing that what we need, what we move toward, is an amalgamation, a synthesis of many of these pieces.
Mm-hmm.
That more of what we do needs to be self-help, and it's a gift economy. I mean, it's for example, a community organizing to care for its children. And we should all be sharing in that. We should all have part of that responsibility, men and women, but also recognizing that it is not something that individual households can each do totally on their own. Now, part of this is recognizing that while we're still humans, which the original humans were, and we still have the same needs in terms of care, it is a totally different situation, that there are 7.8 billion of us. And we have to relate to the land in a very different way. And we are not wandering tribes living by hunting, gathering. And we cannot go back to that. There's no way that's a possibility. Mm-hmm. But we are also now a species with technological capabilities that were totally unimaginable back at that time. Even again, as we were growing up, I don't think any of us could have imagined that the communications capabilities that we have now and some of the technologies that we have, like our our cell phone, and we have to make use of those capabilities. We have to make use of our advanced understanding, but all within a frame of still remembering, yeah, we're living beings, and we need good food, and we need good water. We need a a healthy garden. And how do we put all these pieces together? And again, realizing there that there are so many pieces that we do need to be specialized. We each need to develop areas of knowledge, but again, it's not, I've got all the answers. But these are the things I can contribute, and you've got these things that you contribute, and we bring it together. The other piece is recognizing that nobody has been to the future to which we must now go as a species.
Mm.
That's right.
So nobody knows what it looks like. And this gives you a clue. Anybody that stands up and says, I got all the answers, just follow me, man. I got, we'll just lay it all out for you. That person clearly demonstrates they do not understand the problem.
It's
And
very much like an evolution when we had to come out of the water and walk on land.
yeah.
And we have to go to a new thing that no one has ever seen before. There's no elders to guide us, really, because the elders didn't live in
I've never been there.
Yeah, and this is the emergence, that is coming. But these crises are actually pushing us in the direction of global cooperation. Even the pandemic was pushing us in a particular direction. I'm relieved that I didn't fly for a year.
Yeah.
It's been great.
Absolutely.
The pandemic is an intervention in many ways.
If I never in the rest of my life get on another airplane, I will be very happy. No. I mean, you could make the case that without the pandemic, we would have been lost, that we would never have navigated the depth of change. Now, the pandemic has been, just devastating for so many people. But the truth is not as devastating as the total collapse of Earth's living systems. That, there are absolutely no winners in that world.
And nothing compared to what climate change is going to do to us if it's
exactly.
Nothing compared to the death and disaster that climate change could potentially wreak upon us.
Well, it's climate change, and you look at the statistics. We're destroying our fertile soils. We're running out of them. We're destroying our sources of water. It's extraordinary. China, in some ways is very committed to ecological civilization, supposedly committed to a lot of environmental actions. But you go to China and you can hardly breathe the air. I mean, it's horrendous. I mean, you fly over China, it's just every place is smog every place, and it's horrendous. So yeah,
they're doing enormous tree planting efforts there, enormous trying to green their cities.
Well, see here, this is part of the contradiction. Thing I learned in my last visit to China was that their dominant frame is what they call the two mountain theory. One theory is economic growth. One mountain is economic growth. The other mountain is environmental protection.
And they're
now, have you ever thought of trying to climb two mountains at the same time? Yeah, I mean, it's
that's good.
You got to choose which mountain you're climbing. Now, a lot of people line up with the UN on their so-called sustainable development goals. But if you look closely at the statement of those goals, they're all built around sustained economic growth. it is the same false framework as the China two-mountain theory.
Mhm. Mhm.
You can't do both of them.
Mhm.
And I've long felt that the UN I call them unsustainable sustainable development goals were actually, I mean, they were crafted by neoliberal economists. They're the ones that controlled the process. And I don't know whether it was an intentional deception or it was just their ignorance. But anyhow, the result is what it is, and it's the same misdirection.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you know, David, the British, or do you know of the British economist Anne Pettifor? Um, but regardless, she wrote a book I recently read called The Case for a Green New Deal. And so she was talking about, making the case why we need a Green New Deal and saying, one, it incorporates or it necessitates systemic change, economic systemic change, and that what we need to move towards is kind of what you're saying, a steady state economy, moving away from growth, not even degrowth, but steady state economy. Totally. And she says we need to orient towards needs, not wants, just like all the wants of a shiny new objects, but our needs like healthcare, all the things we need. So, those are people like her, you, and so many others who are pointing, even though we, as we're talking, we may not know the future, but we have people pointing, giving us maps of the terrain so we can help figure it out.
Well,
So,
your very comment there just triggered an insight that I don't think I've written down any place before about the steady state economy.
uh-huh.
At least what always come to my mind when someone talks about steady state economy is that we need to keep GDP constant.
Oh, yeah.
Like right now, we're starting with steady state. And of course, what you're pointing to, I think, is that it's very different to think about the donut economy will probably be a largely steady state economy once we get there.
Mm-hmm.
But GDP may be going all over the place in the process of getting there. So that again brings us back to emergency versus emergence.
Yeah, and a different type of steady state.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well,
In a sense, though, it may never be totally steady state because creation is a continuing process of learning and unfolding. And so we should be learning over time, always learning how to live better, how to be more creative, how to advance spiritually, um, I mean, I can even imagine, I think life, the emergence of life is part of the evolution of creation.
mm-hmm.
And that, the expansion of life through other planets may be part of the creative process. Now, I don't think we're ready to even begin thinking in any serious way about that now, but in terms of the longer term, once we figure out how to live with one another on Earth, um, the idea that we might become involved in terraforming other planets in terms of helping life to become established there in ways that we come to understand it, that would be a possibility, and that may be a way of thinking about, well, why did creation produce humans in the first place? They're a pretty dangerous species. Was there some idea of something positive we might be contributing to this larger process?
Or was it a cosmic joke?
Yeah. Well, or a huge cosmic mistake.
Science experiment.
Yeah, science experiment. What would happen if we created self-aware consciousness at the scale of the human?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that deeper question of what is humans' role in evolution at this point in evolution, because it took, 4.5 billion years to evolve a creature with enough consciousness to become conscious of evolution.
Yeah.
And to consciously evolve. We're the first ones, at least on this planet, that are capable of doing that. So what is our role in the overall evolution? I think it's to help it, to learn about evolution and learn to be in harmony with it.
Yes. Yes.
And then we have evolution to assist us.
Yeah. Well stated.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that I think is part of the larger vision, and it's part of getting beyond this focus on our rights and
Yeah.
what's in this for me, to a sense of our creative responsibility, which is the source of truly our much deeper happiness.
Well, I see that as part of the maturing of the species. Adolescents want their freedom, but they don't understand responsibility. And people want to not wear a mask because they want to be free, but they don't understand their responsibility. And even the procreation of, coming down on the numbers of humans we're creating is part of the adolescent stopping the growth and coming to sustainability. So I put this as we're on the eve of our adolescence coming into our adulthood, and that rights and responsibilities going together, and controlling population and all of that are all part of that maturing that we're going through the initiation.
Yeah, well, let me throw in a little contradiction on that.
Right.
Because that is exactly the frame I took for a long time. But then I realized that if you play that on frame out, you're essentially putting indigenous people in the position of the infantiles.
Yeah.
And in this particular situation, in some ways, they have a deeper wisdom.
Oh, yeah.
That there's an essential foundation of our adult wisdom, and it's the bringing together of that original wisdom with our technological learning and so forth to create a new whole. So again, we're back to how complicated this integration is.
Very complicated.
Yes, very complicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, coming up on an hour and a half, we should probably let people go. I could talk to you all night, David.
Yeah, David, it's great. And the great majority of people stayed on. So I thank everyone for staying on. It's, very stimulating conversation and important. And David, we thank you all for your work and helping pointing the fingers as we're trying to figure out. It reminds me of, there's a Spanish proverb that goes, traveler paths are made by walking. So we're all walking to help create those paths. So thank you, David, for helping be the tour guide.
Yeah. It's all about learning how best to learn.
Yeah.
Wonderful to just absorb your many years of wisdom.